Joining us on this episode is Miles Witt Boyer. Miles is a photographer, educator, podcaster, content creator, and overall personality based in Arkansas. Founding the Photographic Collective, a space for community events and education, Miles is a Fujifilm global ambassador and named one of the top wedding photographers in the world. He's an enthusiastic believer in the magic of our craft and the duty of honoring your client, and takes no breaks in sharing his excitement and passion for his role in our rich and diverse community. I'm Kyle Wilson, and this is The Photographer's Problem. What do you got going on lately?
I mean, most of life at the moment is either photography, clearly, shooting.
Wait, are you a photographer?
Or partnering? Yeah, it's new.
Oh, that's cool.
But I feel good about it.
Good hobby?
Yeah, I grabbed one of those 35 millimeter film point and shoots, and
nice.
The
one they sell at like Urban Outfitters, yeah. The Urban Outfitters also.
Holga, yeah.
Yeah.
It was $12. So yeah, shooting, obviously a lot, a ton of brand sponsorship and partnership stuff going on right now, which is just fun. The industry is, I think it needed a breath. It needed to kind of like chill for a couple of years. And I've got a lot of opinions about that, but the brands are getting really, they're getting really collaborative again, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
This conversation being a perfect example of that. It just like the level of creativity with the brands is back up, which is really cool. And then aside from
who
that,
are you working with right now?
Both of my sons are like living on a soccer pitch right now. I coach one, and then I'm like the number one fan, or I guess number two. My wife is probably the number one fan for the other one. And so life is like full out dad soccer mode. I don't know if you've ever seen the Will Ferrell movie with the track jacket, but that is literally me right now. I'm like, by about 3:00 in the afternoon, I'm putting on an Adidas tracksuit and running to the pitch.
I mean, I feel like that's a pretty good look for you.
I think I can
not the pick a fight part, but the rest of it. The rest of it.
Yeah, I think I actually think I pull off a tracksuit oddly successfully. Yeah, better than I did as a player. I think now the dad mode in me is like, I've given in to my own dignity just enough to sit here and be like, yeah, this is where I'm at in my life at the moment.
Who are you working with in terms of sponsorships and ambassadors right now that you can speak about?
Yeah, I've got a handful of things that I can't speak about, but we also are doing cool things. So I'm still a part of the Fujifilm team. Their team dynamic is switching and changing a lot at the moment, and if you follow the rumor mill at all, just like dive down that rabbit hole. But still working with Fujifilm, which has been 4 years of sort of a remarkable journey. Pretty cool. Also, our presets officially launched just a couple of months ago with Greg Peterson through G Presets, and that was an incredible experience. We spent over 6 months designing the color science and really getting nitpicky about that. And that's launching us into a partnership that I'm not quite yet able to talk about, but really exciting collaboration with sort of the future of color science and the way that will work, I think, going into sort of this next generation of photography. We announced today, actually, a partnership with Nanlite, which is really, really special. I've always wanted a Cine Light sponsor. We've done so much work for so many years with ProPhoto and I love strobes. I love speed lights and all of that stuff. But I've wanted the opportunity to like truly double down on a Cine Light company because we're doing so much video work. I
was going to ask. Let me poke in on that. How, as a non-strobe owner and photographer, really forever, just on camera flash. That's all I really do. So, what are you using strobes for? Like, why has Nanlite and strobes, like, how much is that in your photo work? And obviously it's huge in your video work. How much of that incorporates into your photo work?
More and more. So this became a big goal of Jared and I's about 2 years ago, for us to bring on every year one company in a long-term like documentary perspective. I've poked about this, man. So many different podcasts. I've like joked about the photographers that have time for passion projects. And I'm like, I don't even know what that looks like. Like if you, it feels to me like a lot of the photographers that are like on this constant hunt for a passion project are the same photographers that are griping that don't have enough business. And so I'm like, maybe, I don't know, maybe anyway. So
We'll expand
But
on that.
a couple of years ago, we decided what I did want to do is I wanted to get better at telling stories. And not like from a cheap, like I'm a wedding photographer holding a vanilla latte with a wide brim hat in my bio, like perspective. And I realize that sounds like a huge slap at the industry, but so many of us call ourselves storytellers, but have absolutely no investment in the story. Like we don't ever bother to actually think through the angle of the story we're trying to tell. And so a couple of years ago, we decided like we wanted to really double down on that. And as a part of that, what I realized was a couple of very big truths. Number one, in our company, if we're going to tell stories, we have to include video. Video is just an essential element of storytelling these days. Pretty uncomfortable for me as a photographer because I don't do video. I still don't do video, which means I had to have somebody on my staff that could. And
same.
And that blew the doors open though, for me understanding that like, great video requires great light. And when there is great light and there is great video, the story sort of often starts to tell itself. And then as a photographer, I can like relax and settle into the composition and make sure that I'm shooting from like a place of intentionality and a place of art instead of trying to like overthink or overpose or over direct or, whatever. And so lighting has become this really sort of like breath of fresh air in these moments. And so, I'm still not showing up to like a wedding day, right? With like, 600 watts cine lights. Like that would be a little overkill. But we're having fun with ways that we can like add a little bit of light here and there or kind of kiss the light. Jared's quick to remind me all the time that like the best lighting is light that you can't tell is lit.
Yeah.
So that's always like, we have a lot of people that are like, I thought you were just a natural light photographer. And my response always is just, thank you.
Yeah.
It's like, that's
so just to poke into the way and the process, because I think this could be really insightful. How much of what you just told me, the last 2 minutes of your intentional storytelling thought process, how you can add video to that, punch in a little light, make it natural. How much of that entire intentionality concept do you take with you when you approach someone like Nanlite and say, hey, we'd like to work with this type of gear? Because I think a lot of people often think that they can just flip out an email or an Instagram message and be like, I'm a photographer, you should send me lights. And the ones that break apart past that, I would assume, are the ones that go into it with a lot more intentionality. So I'd be curious if that's the approach you're taking with any of the brands that you're sponsoring with or any of the products you work with.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I think this comes down to the value. Let's boil down the question to what is the value of being a brand ambassador? And the answer to that is twofold. Number one, it's a lot less than you think it is. And number two, you have to do it because you firmly believe in the brand. Meaning like, when Fujifilm offered me a spot on their global team, I didn't go up 100,000 Instagram followers overnight, right? Like they didn't send me a 6-figure signing bonus or like 2 shipping crates full of gear. Instead, it was an opportunity for me to affect the way a brand is perceived inside an industry and then affect the way the brand is developed inside of itself. And so from that perspective, I'll say that like when I'm interested in approaching a new brand, it has to come from me. It has to come from the stance of a problem that I'm seeing either in my own company or in my friends' companies or in the industry at large. Like a perfect example would be working with PicTime. I've been a PicTime ambassador for years, and prior to being with PicTime, and I'm perfectly happy to just say all the brands on here because why not? I mean, I just think it's valuable. But prior to being with PicTime, I spent 10 years using Zenfolio, and that's not a knock on Zenfolio, but they just weren't developing. Yeah. And so I was watching other photographers' work be shown in really cool ways. Their sales were going up, the engagement was going up, and I was seeing in myself that I felt like I was getting left behind. And so when we approached PicTime, where I started was by reaching out to other friends in the industry that used different different gallery servers, and just trying to explore them all. I wanted to know what Pixie Set looked like. I wanted to know what PicTime looked like. I wanted to, like, all of them. I wanted to see them, and I wanted to play with them. And then I wanted to find out who was professionally repping them and what were the reputations of those people. And it got me down a rabbit hole of a conversation with my buddy Phil Porto, who had been with PicTime for a long time. And I asked, I was like, before, I don't want you to just like connect me. I want to know, what is this team like? Because I can afford a PicTime subscription. But what is it like? And he said, I want to connect you with Aga. She's amazing. She's very thought forward. This is a company that is like doing some really cool stuff. Right. I had actually, ironically, a really similar origin story working with Narrative. Very, very similar. Working with Narrative Publish way back in the day, where I got connected with Rebecca. And anyway, long story short, I end up on an email chain with Aga where I have the opportunity now. So now I have a platform and I have a captive audience. I have an opportunity to explain why this means something. And that's where I feel like most photographers, they're so dead set in getting into that moment that they've never thought through what they're going to say. And so they're like, hey, I've got 80,000 Instagram followers, send me gear. And to the brands, it's like, why? Why you? So I had an opportunity to tell that whole story to PicTime and say, like, I can see the industry shifting. I can see how aesthetics are going to be a part of this. I can explain how I have 180,000 images on a server from 10 years of work that just feels cumbersome. Like it's hard to navigate. And I can explain how PicTime is a solution to that problem. And in collateral for that explanation, I would like to be endorsed by the brand. And it was like a very clean, like, sure. Yeah. Why? I mean, why at that point, why wouldn't you? Right. And so, similar conversation with Narrative and with a lot of the brands that with Honeybook, with a lot of the brands that we've worked with over the years. But ultimately, just to answer your question in like the simplest way, it's to say, like, what is being a brand ambassador mean? And if you don't believe in the brands, like you don't firmly believe that what they're creating is the best solution, then what you end up with is the photographers that we all know that just jump from thing to thing, right? Yep. So like they're with Geekoto, but only until Godox calls. And then they're with Godox, but only until Profoto calls. And it's like, it's just this constant jump around of like, I immediately question their integrity in their work. Cause I'm like, well, how do I know what I can believe in if the very brands that you align with don't mean more to you than just until the better company calls?
Yeah. And I think with all that being said too, something that, I've got various brands that I've admittedly become an ambassador for because, well, not such an intentional reason, but because I use the product, I really like it. I think it was the best one for me. I think of Pixeloo. I think Smart Albums is the best album creation software there is. Yeah. I think it shaved off so much of my life creating albums. Did I approach them or anything like that? No, I was really fortunate. But there's this other side that photography can often be this really powerful trading tool. And so whether it be things in my personal life, like my trainer or some tennis lessons, or an alarm clock I'm trying to purchase right now that's not available that I want to take photos for, I think it can be neat to say, hey, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to work with this brand to just make content for, not necessarily be a spokesperson of. Yeah. But I think that when you do become this ambassador thing, I think a lot of times, in my opinion, and maybe yours too, in the industry, I see people shift from, oh, well, I'm just taking photos of this thing. I have followers. I want a free thing. And then I'm going to be an ambassador for it. And I think that brands are getting pickier, rightfully so, with whom they partner with. So they find more people like Miles, who has this entire plan and thought behind it. And it's built around his business and ethics rather than just, can I get some free stuff?
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the easiest answer to it is, I know I mentioned my kids earlier, and my wife is upstairs working right now, and we live in this big, beautiful home that we've built and kind of curated, and none of that happens based on me trading out free goodies.
Exactly.
And so at this point in my career, it's like, I told this on our podcast the other day. We were talking about this. I said, well, if I could charge, let's just use round numbers just for people's sake. If I could charge $10,000 for a wedding, And that wedding is going to take me 30 to 40 hours to complete the entire contract. Then why would I invest 5, 6, 10 hours in time for a brand so that I can get a free flash? Or sometimes not even that, a free t-shirt. It's just a vanity metric of saying like, oh, I'm endorsed by, yada, yada. And then gripe at the end of the year that I didn't take on more weddings because I didn't have more money. And so where I'm at this point, and that probably sounds really money hungry and very privileged. And I don't want it to come across like that, but where I'm at right now is like, I'm partnering with brands. I work with brands that have a budget and a benchmark for who their ambassadors are. And then we can be honest with people and say like, listen, I'm a paid spokesperson for this brand, but I chose them and then they chose me. So I don't know. That sounds very
and
soapboxy.
I think it speaks to, like you already mentioned earlier too, that, and I don't think this is a bad thing when people say they don't have a passion project or something like that, because your passion is already happening. You're already, in my opinion, everything you're doing, it does happen to have money attached to it, but well, you've got a mortgage and kids, so why shouldn't it? Passion projects are a privilege in themselves, that you can say, hey, I'm going to go do this thing and it's not going to affect my livelihood, or I've chosen that it is going to affect my livelihood and I've come to terms with that. But just because there is money driven behind it, and I think that's something that happens in this industry a lot too, is people forget that this is a very, very expensive hobby to get into, but a very, very cheap business when you compare it to almost any other line of, especially trades work. And ultimately, like, your goal is to pay for your livelihood and your children and your family and your retirement and your house and your employees and everything that goes with it. So why shouldn't all of your time be consumed with, hey, is this gonna make ends meet and push your brand forward?
Yeah, dude. Well, I think on the other hand, like I mentioned, just questioning the integrity of other people's work when I don't see them act with that kind of intentionality. I guess like my passion projects would be things like, I was waiting for a shoot the other day, waiting for a couple to arrive for an engagement shoot at a coffee shop, and there was a guy, this dude, like, it looks like a Greek god. It turns out, I mean, he's hilarious. Of course, he has too many Instagram followers. Of course, but he's sitting there with his like little Fujifilm XS10 or something, like a small camera, and I walk up with two large like GFX cameras, strapped up, and so he started the conversation. And it turns out that this guy's like a year out of college. He works for the coffee shop. He's trying to kind of get his feet wet. He's doing some like content creation type stuff, whatever, right? You want to know where my passion projects come in, is having the opportunity to look at that guy and say, hey, can I take you to coffee next week?
Yeah.
Like, can I carve an hour out for you? And he sat back and he's like, why would you do that? I'm like, because I can clearly remember being 20, 21, 22 with a camera, just wishing, begging for someone that I respected for their attention to give me just a little bit of advice. And what I ran into was a lot of ego and a lot of insecurity. And I'm like, man, if we're going to do anything in this industry that has like lasting like legacy, it's not going to be bragging about the camera brand that we shoot. It's going to be like pouring into the next generation of photographers and reminding them that like their value is in the depth and the integrity and the creativity of their work, and not in whether or not their camera says Sony on the front or Fujifilm on the front, or, and I realize, like, unpopular opinion probably as a global ambassador for a camera brand, but man, the brands can't define our work. We have to be artists first.
Yeah. I think that's huge. I think that pay it forward methodology. Like, I remember the first time that like the photographer that I was like the local mentor, the guy that I was like, dude, that's the guy's work I want to learn from, invited me to his studio, and I stayed there till 3 a.m. as he poked through all of my portfolio, and we talked, and we ended up becoming colleagues at that point, moving forward, which was great. And even now, as I shuffle out of the industry and I'm not necessarily focused on weddings, whenever photographers in my like sphere come into existence and I go, hey man, like, do you want to go like meet for an hour or two for coffee? And I've got a full brain of knowledge that took me way too long to get to, that I'm happy to just like pour into your ears if you'll let me talk at you for 2 hours, and you don't even need to buy me coffee. I'm just an extrovert, and this meets my needs. So I think
cool.
I think it's huge.
I want coffee with you soon, by the way, Kyle. I would honestly.
Well, you are very far away.
Okay.
You know,
Well,
Arkansas is a bit of
WPPI next
stretch.
year. I can.
Yeah.
I'm going to collide with. I told James yesterday on our call with him that I'm like, if you aren't in Las Vegas next year, I'm coming. I'm not. I'm coming to you instead. So we're either gonna have coffee in Las Vegas, or we're gonna have coffee in New Zealand. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, arguably though, I will say I vote for the New Zealand part because New Zealand coffee is pretty incredible.
Okay.
Their coffee scene is something fun about New Zealanders. I didn't know until I got there that I really love telling everyone is so many times we would go to the coffee shop, we would have a cup of coffee, we would sit there and drink it, and then before we left, everyone gets a second round of coffee, and then we leave, which I thought was very different than here. Here, you have your coffee and then you go. If I were to tell my friends I'm going to get another coffee before I go, they would look at me. Well, my friends know me as the espresso nerd, so they would think it's right in line. But anyone else would think that's so strange. And it's such a big part of their culture there, I noticed, and I think it's fascinating.
Okay. Well, so then we just worked this out.
Yeah,
March
we're going to
next year, New Zealand coffee date.
I know James listens to these podcasts. He'll definitely listen to this one. So, James, Miles and I would like to have some coffee in New Zealand with you sometime soon.
With you. And you know what? Miles offered to pay for the coffee, assuming that you would like to foot the bill for the flight. I think
that's a very equal trade.
Yeah.
Right next door to Narrative's office is also one of the best pastry places I've ever had. So this is a real win.
Did you just say we have to buy pastries too? This is okay.
I just looped you in for a croissant. I figured with the cost of the flight minus the cost of coffee and a croissant, we'll throw in a Narrative T-shirt. I think
I will carb load with you
out
in New Zealand. Okay.
Perfect.
Fair enough. Let's go.
They'll take the T-shirt out of my paycheck. I just gave it up, so that's fine. So dive into I've got a few questions that I kind of go through on these things, and sometimes they come up organically, sometimes they don't. But I'll just interject these in here. But
you're saying this time it's not coming up organically. Okay, good.
I know this time it's not coming up organically. The other ones they will. They'll be so smooth. As you've been in this career a really long time, and you're really, really established. There's so many things that you've managed to accomplish and do, and Fujifilm ambassador and Hold Fast and so on. What has been your proudest moment in your career thus far? What's been the thing that you, at this current moment, go, that happened, I either was striving for it, or I didn't even know it was going to happen, and now I'm just so stoked that it exists, or that I'm able to do something with it?
Man, what a loaded question. Actually, you could have totally worked that in, except that I think I broke our momentum by switching over to a coffee date with James.
That's okay. I had a plan for it, and then you did break the momentum.
And then I ruined your plan, and that is my proudest moment.
The editor is gonna make movie magic out of this, and we'll never even know.
Okay, good. No pressure. Let's see. I mean, let's rattle off. I'll rattle off a couple of things that come to mind quickly. I had the opportunity, not the brand new the X100 that just launched from Fujifilm, but the X100V, the one that kind of changed the world. I was a part of that launch. That was a big moment for me. I loved it. The XT4, I was a part of that launch, and the GFX100S, a part of that launch. All of those things, I think, on paper, probably those are the answers I'm supposed to rattle off. Again, I don't want to come across as disgruntled here, but I'll be blunt and say I've matured a lot beyond the need for a brand's tip of the hat to me to say that is my proudest moment. So super proud moments. Really cool to see my imagery be a part of these kind of iconic launches. I'm hungry. So that good stuff there. I am now getting to a point where I've done this for long enough that there was your first 4 or 5 years, I feel at this, you're sort of on the hunt for who your client is going to be, who you want your client to be. And a lot of times I see photographers now that sort of fall into that maybe much quicker than I did. But I truly went down a very weird path of trying to find out who I wanted my client to be. And so I spent probably 3, 4, maybe 5 years maybe not quite that, but 3 or 4 years trying to figure out who that person was. And then I got plugged in with a demographic of people that I just love. And I love their stories. I love their, just like the way that they allow me and trust me to do this job. And this is a really cool, just sort of a place I'm at right now in my career. Those couples are now hitting their 10-year mark. And so I'm starting to see work that I shot 10 years ago, a decade ago, pop back up on social media networks, or pop back up like couples that are contacting us for like a kind of like a rebuilt album. I mean, like, can we refresh their images, kind of like update the edits and whatever, and reprint an album for them. Proud moment for me, like currently, is things that realizing that I've spent a decade now with the clients that I believe in so much that like I still like my work from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't like my work from 14 years ago, but I do like from 10 years ago, I'm seeing stuff that I'm like, man, we actually were kind of ahead of the curve on some stuff. So like that was cool. The first time I got asked to speak, a platform speaker at ClickCon in Chicago, I felt like I had like made it. And then I got asked to speak at WPPI and I was like, oh my gosh, Huge. It's over, right? Like, sign the checks. I'm literally going to be filling out autographs of people's t-shirts. And that didn't happen. We launched a podcast and that podcast hit the top 5% of the podcast market. And I was like, we've made it. Like, we launched an education platform for photographers like all over the world, and we did it for free. All of these moments have happened, but what I realize, and I'm realizing more and more, is that like my proudest moments are often like individual vignettes, like tiny images that I can't believe I took. And moments that we planned and prepped and breathed into, and then the actual image was so much better than I thought it was going to be. And then often also things that I didn't expect. I actually battled yesterday on Instagram. I battled posting this image because it's not as good as a lot of my work is. And I say that objectively. But I shot a father-daughter dance 2 years ago in California that for some reason just occurred to me yesterday, and I missed it. I wanted to go see these pictures. But the dad is a quadriplegic. So he literally drives his wheelchair with his mouth, with this kind of like weird mouthpiece thing. And the groom picked up his wife and set her in his lap, and they danced in his wheelchair in Palm Springs. And every single person, myself included, was crying, and it was just a special moment. And going back and finding those photos and realizing like these aren't wildly epic cinematic photos. Like this isn't stuff that people ask me to speak because of, but I'm so proud of the fact that like I was so invested in that moment that I got it, and I got it so authentically, and I got it so sharp and so clean. And then I chickened out yesterday and I did not post it. So
well, I will leave you a challenge. I think I will leave you the challenge that you should post it, because I think Ben speaks on this a bit pretty regularly about how he is not a award-winning photographer. Like that's not his deal. His deal is those types of moments. They are the stuff that to you and me, we can kind of be a bit of a conduit, and to regular audience people, they're going to maybe absorb it a bit, but the real impact of that photo comes down to the bride and the groom that day, and the dad in the chair. Those are the people that really, to them, it is the most epic, cinematic, incredible moment that they've ever seen. And I think when that is done intentionally from your lens, then the audience can jump on board that same kind of quote unquote emotional hype train. And so it might not be the photo that looks like a Christopher Nolan movie, but that's everyone. That's really digestible for everyone. But something that's so important like that might just take a little bit of a digestion from the audience in a different way.
Yeah. Okay. Noted. I'll hear that. I actually think that's valuable. I mean, I agree as well. I think that, you asked a very simple question and I've really danced around the answer. I think my proudest moments in my career thus far are moments where I realize that like the art that we are creating has true value, like lasting, beautiful legacy level value. And that sometimes the metrics through which most of our industry gauge whether or not something is valuable don't reflect that. And I'm becoming more and more okay with it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And something you mentioned at the top there that I wanted to circle back was that you sought after a particular kind of client for a while, and years ago compared to now, I think that those networks are just different. They really, those information superhighways that exist between I'm a photographer A and I'm looking for client B really exist now, and they just didn't really before. And so I think that people now don't have to like maybe hop and skip around and maybe even fall into some pitfalls that we may have um, throughout that process of finding your ideal client, quote unquote, or just building your business as a whole. Are there any, in the same retrospective proudest moments, are there any really big pitfalls where you go, ooh, I shouldn't have done that. That was a bad idea. That
Yes.
was a learning experience to the 10th degree.
Gosh, yeah, man. Yeah, so many of those. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that I wish there was a podcast all focused on people's failures. That sounds really dark. But like we need to hear it. Like we need to hear the fact that
Yeah.
people stumble, and we need to hear the fact that people like names that we know. Um, you know, you mentioned Binge just a minute ago, and I won't air his laundry, but I had a fascinating conversation with Binge one time that truly opened my eyes to how isolating and lonely the top of this industry can be. And yeah, so like I've told this story a number of times. Um, but let me give you two. First, I'll tell you that fairly early on in my career, I was still sort of in the place where it was like you kind of take anything that comes your way, right? Like, and maybe
You're a
not.
yes man.
I had sort of moved beyond like I'll shoot anything, but if there's a wedding dress or let's be more specific, a couple involved, regardless of what that looks like, if there's a couple involved, I'm in. And I had an opportunity to shoot a wedding that I knew when I met with this couple that I was not a good fit for. Like I knew it. It just didn't feel right. And yet they had the budget for one of my like biggest packages. Fast forward, I'll tell you guys this without going deep into numbers. My cheapest package is now twice as much as what that package was. So it's like I should have just stayed the path. You know, like I should have just trusted the process. But
Yeah.
anyway, I was like, okay, let's go. I'm just swallowing my instinct, swallowing my all the voices in my head. Anyway, what ends up happening is this very toxic, very uncomfortable relationship with this couple that wanted a bunch of stuff that I was completely unwilling to give them. And that's hard because I'm pretty willing these days to give my couples just about anything, as long as they'll just trust the process, like trust me to go at it from like kind of an organic perspective. But this one was not going to work. And it got so bad that literally just a couple of weeks before the wedding, I offered to not only refund all of their money, but to help them find another photographer.
Oh
I was
wow.
like, this feels so bad. This feels so gross that like I will help. I will serve you guys in this, and let's just call it. Let's just admit to what this is. And they were like, nope, you're in it. You signed the contract. You're stuck. Well, okay, that's not the end of the story. Here's the actual end of that story. I realized in that moment I have an obligation to serve this couple. That is like what I signed up to do. And so I did that, and I doubled down, and I created work that I actually feel like was really beautiful. And I hated every step of the way. They were miserable to work with. They were mean. They were just ugly people. And I delivered photos that I was truly proud of. And those of you guys that are thinking like, oh, they hated them. They didn't. They loved them. They loved the photos. And over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, I had to deal with all of their rude, self-absorbed, angry friends calling me, asking me to be their wedding photographers too. And I realized that when you make one toxic decision for your business, and then you still serve that couple the way that you should, that you end up flooded with toxic decisions that you have to now get out of. And if I would have just told this one couple no, if I would have just stood my ground and you know whatever, I would have I would have bypassed so much heartbreak. And then here's the funny thing. Years and years later, I shot a wedding actually just down the road from this venue. I've only even been to this town a couple of times in my life, but I shot another wedding just down the road. And we were in a hurry, and we have such a process as a company, such an extreme process as a company for how everything works. But we were in a hurry. We were behind. The light was going down. I reached into my bag and I grabbed a third camera that had cards in it, but it just was outside of our normal process. And I got to work on the family photos with that third camera because I didn't take the time, the 2 minutes that it would take to pull the cameras out of camera one and put them in the two different card cases and put new cards in and format, whatever. So anyway, we just went after it, and we got right to it and got to the end of the night exhausted and fried and ready to call it a day. And we threw all the cameras back in the bag, and we went home. And I pulled out my card case, and I dumped the cards and backed them all up on multiple hard drives and the server and the whole thing. And even pulled everything into Lightroom just to make sure it all looked good. And it did. And there was no problems and everything was good. And I don't know, 5-6 weeks later, we delivered this wedding that I was so excited about. I was so proud of. And then I get a call from the couple, from the bride, that says, "Hey, where are the family photos?" And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm a crazy person? Like, no. What do you mean where I delivered everything? So I look back in and I'm like, weird. That is weird. That's like everything right up to the family photos is in there, and everything right after the family photos is in there. And I'm like, what the heck happened? And I'm like, oh crap. Camera 3. And I'm going into the case and pulling things out. No, we've shot 100 things since then. Those cards have been formatted. Yeah. Those family photos are gone. Dude, you want to talk about a low point in my career? Like just a moment of just deep regret. We have a process for a reason, and we broke it. And I had to call that couple and explain what happened, and did it, again, with honesty and some humility, and hoping that the couple would be like, but, the other 1,000 photos you gave us are beautiful. Everything is good. Nope, that did not happen. They lost their minds.
No.
There was zero grace given, and I didn't deserve it. I mean, I was asking for grace that I didn't deserve. And so I ended up having to shell out of pocket thousands of dollars to get the florals remade, the archway remade, to rent the venue again out of pocket. I bought the groom and his dad and brother new tuxedos to wear for this thing. She had to get her hair and makeup redone. And all of this was just a practice. It was completely irrational, but all of this was a practice in me learning a lesson to give them the family photos that they should have had the first time. So I lost a lot of money on that wedding. Yeah. And it was my own fault. So there you go. How's that?
I actually think I'm of the opinion, because it's happened to me, I think that every wedding photographer at some point should lose some photos, because I would be willing to bet that your data backup from that point forward is as rock solid as mine is from the point forward that I lost photos too.
Oh yeah.
That is like, it sits there. My system is always like, every year I revisit it and think, how could I mess this up? Because I remember messing it up, and I remember losing 900 images. And thankfully, in my situation, it was like a second or a third shooter. The only thing that was like truthfully, genuinely lost was some like wider angles and maybe some photos of the bouquet. I think those are the only things that were like gone. But I remember going to the bride's house, and I remember sitting at her dining room table and talking to her about it. And I remember the subsequent actions following it. And it's, when I go to do data backup, it scratches the back of my brain. And I think that it's a really good learning experience. I don't want anyone to actually lose images that are really valuable or actually like have an unresolvable situation. But I think that, if you stub your toe on that one piece of furniture in your house one good time, you probably won't do it again.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I mean, just the level of humility, I think that we all, honestly, that we all need. Like, I think that's maybe where I'm at in my profession in general right now, is the realization that like I have kind of climbed there's a lot of ladders to the top, and I've climbed a lot of different ladders to nearly the top, to the point where I could see over the roof for a lot of different aspects of this industry. And man, the people that are up there, the people that most of us really aspire to get to know, at this point, I get to call a lot of those people friends. And it is these stories that unite them. It's not the wild work and the crazy cinematic things, and it sure isn't the awards. Like, those aren't the conversations that people sit around having. It's like, we're going to have tequila in Las Vegas, and we're going to sit around and we're going to tell horror stories so that we can all learn from each other's, and it's like, hey, how is your workflow better because of this? So,
yeah. I mean, it's the reason I love having, for the first few hundred weddings of my career, I had a second shooter who was like a business partner at various times. And I had a built-in buddy, which touches on my extroversion a lot. But it's also like, yeah, there were moments that we had a really great photo and we could like high five about it and it's awesome. But to have that person through the day when either something bad is happening that's in my control or just something bad is happening that's out of my control, and to be able to look at them and go, hey, do you see this happening right now? Because we can have this camaraderie of the weird shit that happens in a wedding day. Yeah. Cy more recently said something that I thought was really beautiful. And he said, as a wedding photographer, you're the only person in the room who can predict the future. Like you can look at a room and really see the energy, the vibe, what's going on, who's walking in, who's walking out, what time things need to be done. And you're the only one that can predict the future. And once you can do that, you can really tell these stories. Or you can also just watch as things unfold as well. And it's this very unique lane. And so I like having a second shooter on a day because I like having a buddy that's also with me in that strange, unique position.
Man, you're so spot on there. Like you really have this opportunity as a wedding photographer, though, to lean into that. I think the one thing that I'm seeing happen so much in the industry right now is that younger photographers or maybe like whatever, less experienced photographers are operating from such a stance of insecurity that the goal to perfect every moment, to make every moment this like viral ready social media movement is dominating their headspace. And it's because they're so afraid of those moments, whether they have a second shooter or not. They're just scared to death. What happens when something uncomfortable happens and I'm not ready? And so instead of like telling the future from an authentic perspective, from sitting and walking into a room and saying like, I can feel this and I know something big is about to happen, they're trying to script it. And so they walk into every room and they immediately start to like fix all of the things that aren't perfect. And I'm seeing that stuff happen. It's permeated so deeply. And I think, anybody that's been in the industry for a little while will say like, I think we all remember when the idea of a first look turned into, oh, if she doesn't walk up behind him and tap him on the shoulder, it's not a first look.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the idea of like bridesmaids all lined up and having fun together turned into like, okay, everybody line up, touch shoulders, look at each other and fake laugh.
It's why I'm kind of the anti that. Like I have a few photographers that I've worked with who I will call, they're like working with a walking TikTok. Just they take a personality trait that they already kind of exist and then crank it up a bunch and they sugarcoat and they try to create all this like really inorganic work. And the way that I'm talking with you now is the way that I speak with my friends and my clients and my relationships. I am steady all the time. I make fun of my clients on a wedding day. I poke fun at them and they like, if a bride looks at me and says, shut the fuck up, Kyle, that's like awesome. We are tight now. We're friends. And I love when they're bridesmaids, because I've really earned that thing with the client because they really trust me. And the planner or the bridesmaid who has just like a Pinterest version of their day comes in and pitches an idea. I love when my couples are on my team and they look at them like, Kyle's going to think that's so dumb. We're not doing that. Yes. And I remember going through so many of those, like they feel very chunky. And if a bride and groom says, hey, we want to take photos of our bridesmaids jumping up and down, whatever. I'm going to take it. It's your day. It's going to get delivered. I'm never going to share it. But if that's what you want, that's fine. I'm not, I can't be the judge on anyone's fun. But I also really want to, they just don't know. They don't know what the steak at the end looks like when it's all been organically made and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's,
and it's just that way that then you can serve them. Like you can show up in their lives. Right. And I had a dad that's also on my son's soccer team. We were talking the other day, and I had just gotten back from a wedding in Mexico, and he's like, "Man, tough life, right? Like you had to go to Cabo for work." And he's asking me all these questions, and I I get to have some fun with this, right? So he's like, "I have a serious question. Like, do you get to like drink at those weddings?" And I kind of sit back and laugh, and I'm like, "Dude, my clients demand it. Like
Yeah.
and he's like, I can't even imagine. So you just walking around drunk?" And I'm like, "No, gosh, no, absolutely not. No, definitely not." But I'm like, am I, carrying a scotch around or a margarita around and having fun with my clients? Absolutely. They expect that out of me. And he's like, "I guess our situation was just so much different." I'm like, "Well, tell me about your wedding photos." And he's like, "They're horrible." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, fair. Tell me about the photographer." He's like, "He was so awkward. He was in like jeans and these tall boots I'll never forget." And I'm like, he probably, poor dude, he probably felt so uncomfortable at your wedding
Yeah.
and didn't realize, like had no idea that he was the reason he was uncomfortable. Like he had isolated himself from this moment so much. Um, but if we would just serve our clients better, right? Like I say this a lot of times in our trainings and different podcasts and whatever, because it's become such a well, it's becoming more standard, which I love. But I can remember the first several years that Holdfast Gear posted photos of me working at a wedding, and people would comment under it and be like, "That's not a real photographer. That guy's in a tuxedo. You hired a model." And Matt would be like, "No, that's like his name's Miles. That is him working, right?"
Yeah.
And they're like, "No photographer could work all day in a tuxedo." I'm like, "Guys, just this is their wedding day. Like, you realize that one of the simplest ways that we can show respect for our couples on their wedding day is to look like we want to be there?"
Yeah, and I think it's in part a big client education thing too. Like you mentioning that that friend of yours saying, "Oh, do you get to drink on these days?" I feel like that falls right in like there's like 5 or 10 top 10 questions I get asked as a photographer by, I'm going to call them normies, people outside the industry who are go, "Tell me, oh my god, you probably have like tons of crazy wedding stories, right?" No, because my clients after a certain price point have been receiving a different version of my brand, which means I've suss them out in a different way. I've educated them all along the process from like what it's like to book a wedding photographer. I'm a really big proponent of at the end of a consult, I'm like, "Hey, let me talk to you about the things you need to make sure that you didn't ask me that you need to be asking your next people."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair.
And all the way through the end of the gig. And so those people just don't know. And so the same person that says, "Oh, I assume you're drinking at these days and it's so uncomfortable," is from their own very narrow perspective because they've only been to a handful of weddings, 5, 10 weddings or something like that. And similarly with the hold fast and the tuxedo, it's like people that don't go to the right weddings or work with the right clients or the vendors or whatnot have really very little idea. And so it's way more up to me when I talk to a friend or I'm on a date or something and they say, "Oh, you probably have all these crazy stories." I go, "No, actually, like I get to work with really amazing people. Like the clients I get to work with are people I would genuinely seek out in my personal life." And so there's not crazy stories with those because they're wonderful people and
Yeah.
all of their people are wonderful people. So I get to take that moment to kind of extinguish the idea to this person that all weddings have this crazy toxicity or strangeness to them. And some do, but I get to go, "No, no, no. Like, you don't even know there's another side of this industry where wedding clients and photographers like love the crap out of each
I
other."
love it. That's what
Yeah.
we tell clients a lot. We don't bridezilla. We just don't do it. It's just not a thing. Like
Yeah.
even when I work with clients that can be pretty high maintenance, and I mean you get this as well because in sort of the upper demographics of this industry, most of our clients can afford to pay somebody else to be stressed for them, but often they're very refined people, and what comes with that is often a lot of opinions. Really opinionated people I love though, because I'm like, man, I love that I know what you like and what you don't like, and
Yeah.
you still trust me to get that for you. But yeah, we just don't bridezilla. There's just no room for the ego
Yeah.
here. This is a collaborative thing, right? Like we're gonna get to know each other so well that maybe we are friends after this, and we do love spending time together.
Yeah.
We get to hang out, and we go have a beer, or honestly, the case with most of our clients, we release them into their lives after their wedding and say like,
Yeah.
"Hey, you guys are freaking awesome. We hope you have the best marriage. And anytime that you need a camera or just a high five, I hope that we're on that list. And I mean, that's it. That's just, we just have served them all the way through. And it's a fun, like, that's a fun journey. I think to your point a few minutes ago, saying like having a second shooter with you gave you that sort of that security to sort of like find that in yourself, and how to really scratch that itch for your couples. I had to spend a fair amount of time without a second shooter to have that confidence. I needed to know that I could do the work, like that I could trust myself to be the artist. And I spent several years, because I had a pretty large brand for a number of years. I spent several years where it was like, I never rolled in without a team. And I started to realize it was forming really bad habits in me. And even to the point where I was like, I was seeing a moment that needed to happen, and I was telling somebody to go shoot it.
Yeah.
And
rather than
I was becoming like a
DP
at a wedding. Right. And so I had to take a few years. That actually really was like the story of 2020 and 2021 for me. Was like this pandemic hit, and all of a sudden I had to do the work again. And it was the best work we've ever created, because I was like, oh my gosh, I can still be an artist. Like, I'm actually still pretty good at this. And now, like, Jared and I do this. He's the only full-time shooter left for our company. And I love that. And I'm like, we just do this together. But when he's not there, all it is for me is I just miss him. I'm like, I want to call and be like, you will never guess what I just saw. Like,
yeah, there's a camaraderie to having, like, I shot weddings with, his name is Steven. I shot probably 250, 300 weddings with Steven. Even if I don't, at this point, it's like, hey, do you just want to like hang out and talk about wedding stuff? Because it's this very unique camaraderie. You've made a bunch of, there's so many levers to get to where like your brand, podcast, everything is now. Obviously, you've gone through big teams, shooting solo. Now you just have the one other full-time person, adding video, etc. But is there one thing that you can point to and say that was a really good decision that like spawned a lot of butterfly effect in the rest of your success?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Realizing that we were going to serve the people. It was like what are the pillars that we're going to build this company on? And it's not going to be gear. It's not going to be social media. It's not going to be whatever. I mean, any of these like kind of fairly toxic things that I see a lot of people kind of bank on.
And did that come about slowly, like a frog being boiled slowly, or was there one day where you're like, actually, this makes the most sense?
It was a conversation, and I remember it very clearly. It was a conversation with Jared where we were trying to kind of like firm up rebuilding our packages to where I could truly pay him what it's worth to have him with me. And we were battling this concept back and forth of like, second shooters are typically getting, $50 an hour or $60 an hour or something like that. It's not enough money, even $100, whatever it is. It's not enough money for that second shooter to call this a full-time job.
Yeah.
And yet the pressure on those people usually isn't high enough to justify a lot more. And so we sat down together, we're having coffee. We sat down and I said, I'm building this brand that is my name, because at this point I've leveraged it. We have brand endorsements, we have sponsorships, we have whatever. I'm not changing the name of my company. We're not going to open Dreamcatcher Productions or something and it be the Miles and Jared show. This is the Miles
show. If you do, don't call it that.
Please, okay. Like, this is going to be the Miles show. But that being said, I want to get rid of the ego. I want to get rid of the entitlement, and I want to be able to express that, like, Jared, when you're with me, when you shoot with me, I am better for it. And what are the uniting principles then that we can build on moving forward? And so the conversation was a number of things. A, we've got to charge a lot more. B, I can't just look at all that extra money as profit, because I have to invest it back into the people that are making me valuable, i.e. Jared, right? So I've got to charge more so that I can pay him more. C, that means that his responsibility has to be much deeper than just like showing up 10 minutes before the contract starts with a camera in his hands. He has to be invested in this company as well. And that means that he has to have responsibilities on the Monday to Friday gig, and not just Saturday, right? And so we sat back and we were looking at what is it that unifies all of these things? Why? Like you hear that cheesy term all the time, but like, what is your why, right? But like, why do we care this much? And what it came down to, quite simply, was we serve these people better. We tell their stories better when we are so intentional about the process that we're backing each other up, even when he's not with me, that he's a part of the process, a part of the narrative, a part of the storytelling. And we're like, it's got to be the people. And so then it's like, okay, well, then I don't care, frankly, if I shoot 15 weddings a year at the exact same venue. I don't need to travel all over the world anymore, but I love to. Like, I don't need to be a first-class wedding photographer, but it's fun. Right? Because suddenly we put blinders on and we said, we're going to sit with these people. We're going to get to know these people. And we're going to be so choosy with who our couples are that we can now justify the cost of why it's so expensive, because we're going to serve them well. And so it wasn't, it was like a series of small decisions that had gotten us there, but there was a specific moment where we raised our prices roughly 30, I think it was a little over 30%. And we just said, this is money that should be allocated to this person, this entity in my life. He deserves it. But then if we're going to charge that, if we're going to bill that through, what is his role going to be? And it's been really special. He's taken on this role of like holding hands with our couples through these processes. And it's really, really
I think
special.
you transition from, and maybe this isn't the title you put at it, but it's something that I think is really special in this industry. When people land in this lane, you went from the mindset of seeking an ideal client to being the ideal photographer, which I think is a totally different thing to do. And I think an ideal photographer is much more focused on serving their client, whereas looking for an ideal client means everything's going to be easy. Oh, it's going to be, I'm only going to do a good job if it's easy and it meets all my little boxes. But if you're being the ideal photographer, then you're honoring them and you're catering their needs and you're educating and you're bringing in people like a second photographer that isn't just some rando second shooter. It's someone who's also equally invested. So you've become the ideal vendor for them.
Dude, yes. And that decision right there, that informs so much. I mean, like, here's a real takeaway for people. I had a conversation the other day with a friend of ours that's an editor at a big wedding magazine. We were talking about the cost of a full page ad. And not to burn anybody. And in fact, actually, we're going to be advertising with this magazine, and I'm excited about it. But I haven't done that in years, and there's a whole other concept as to why. But anyway, it's a chance to kind of serve them. But the conversation was, let's just use round numbers. If you're gonna spend $5,000 a year in a full page in this magazine, imagine what you could do for your existing clients with $5,000. Like, you could blow their minds. Yeah. I'm not talking giving them a discount. I'm talking like you could shock people with $5,000. Along the lines of like, what you could, here's some ideas. You could pick your 5 favorite couples from the year. You could fly to their house and hand deliver their book for $5,000. You could give every single one of your couples a $150 Starbucks gift card and a calendar of dating things, ideas for like, hey, go every other Wednesday, grab coffee, and here's something to talk about. You could just invest in these humans that have already invested in you. And you know what you're going to get out of it is a lot more business in return, a lot more business than out of people flipping through a magazine looking for your ad.
1,000%.
Because they're not looking for your ad. And so all that being said is what came out of this for me was to your point of saying, like, you became the ideal photographer. What we started to realize was every decision from a marketing stance, when it becomes about the people, when it becomes about serving their stories and like honoring them, it becomes so easy. Like, now we don't have to cast this super wide net. So if my Instagram followers go up a few hundred or go down a few hundred, it does not matter to me. As long as the 25 couples that we have chosen to work with this year, as long as those 25 couples feel loved on, and the 25 couples from last year still feel like they can text me, and the 25 couples from the year before that can run into me at the grocery store and we still hug, like those are the stories that matter. And the business just builds on that like crazy. It's really wild.
Yeah, it's huge. You've got a bunch of irons in the fire right now. You've got a bunch of stuff going on. But what's your problem? What are you working on? It's like, man, what's the big thing happening?
Okay. Well, here's the problem is, poof. Okay, let's go. Let's just spill it. You want to spill the tea?
Spill it. Do it. This will come out in like 2 or 3 weeks. So anything that's happening before that's okay.
I'm just playing. Okay. Yeah, I see what you said. I see what you did there. Yeah, the problem is currently, we have built an incredibly strong business that serves our couples, and we've built a pretty strong business that serves the wedding industry and photographers. The problem is that those are two incredibly different businesses. Huge. And I have gotten really good at making a living that I'm really proud of off of the first group. And I'm trying to invest more and more time and more resources and more of myself into serving and loving with the same amount of intentionality into the second. But I have no interest in becoming just another one of the photo educators that are just shouting into the vacuum.
Yeah.
So the problem currently is, how do we do a better job of speaking to photographers and speaking to photo brands and educating and training and loving on people? And how do we make that so lucrative that time isn't time lost from a brand that's already very successful?
Yeah, it's finding, the same way you're honoring your wedding clients, it's honoring photographers and their trust in your knowledge. So rather than, hey, come to my workshop, listen to me talk for 3 hours, take an hour of photos with me, and then out the door, that's a lot different than building and forming relationships with these photographers that you want to have trust you and you trust them and create that kind of a space with them.
Yeah, and I think we've done a really great job of that on like a 1-to-1 level. I would say there's probably like 50 to 75 photographers that I, on a weekly basis, really connect with.
Yeah,
that's really special, but that's not enough from to make it lucrative enough to make it a business thing. And so, it's an interesting time to be in the industry. Dude, if I had if I got paid $1 for the number of people that have written me to ask me about this new Fujifilm X100 VI6 camera, if I got $1, bro, we could retire, like the two of us.
Yeah.
Because the industry is like starving for answers. Like, oh my, is it as great as that? They sold 1 million of them. Can you believe that? And I'm like, not only can I believe it, but I wasn't invited to be a part of that launch. That is not a camera that's made for me.
Yeah. I think they're starving in a way that I thought is very interesting. So my Instagram feed is mostly bicycles, coffee, and film photographers. I'd say that's the majority of it, and interior design. But as I scroll through any of those 4 categories, whenever a reel or a post comes along, the questions feel very similar. If I'm looking at a beautiful apartment, someone's asking, where's this table? Where's this lamp? Where's this? They're just trying to reach for whatever they can grab. And in photosphere, it's very similar. Like, even when I see photos that are film photos, old cameras, point and shoot, nothing that really, this is pretty mindless work and hardware that's happening. Obviously, the actual product at the end is really beautiful, depending on who it is. The people are still asking the same question: what lens, what camera, what film stock, how do you sell your edit recipes, things like that. And I think it's really interesting to see, and I go, oh my gosh, these are still the same problems that existed when I started, where you had a bunch of people that went, oh, it's Canon this or Nikon that, and they're one team is obviously better than the other for this type of work. And ultimately, as you get further in this industry, we all know that I can go shoot a wedding with a Canon or a Nikon or a Leica or a Fuji, and at the end of the day, that wedding's going to look good because I know what I'm doing.
That's
and it's
it.
way less about the gear, unless you find gear that you really like for your particular niche, style, taste. I don't buy Leicas because they're the best camera. I buy them because they make me feel good. They make me feel good when I take photos of them. But
dude,
I think the industry
really
is
cool?
Yeah. It was the little yeah. That's nice. That's super
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
It's very
Anyway,
cool. That's a sick
C1.
looking little camera too.
It's a C1. I found it I don't know, a couple weeks ago. I'm so not a like
it's very cool.
I joke with Summer Grace. I'm so not like a point and shoot film photographer, but I am now.
Heck
You're right, man. We've just got to stop we got to stop consuming content as though something that cannot feed us is going to feed us. We got to stop. We got to cut that crap out.
I think what I'd be really more
that's actually like sustains our souls as artists.
Yeah, I think what I'd be really more interested if I were starting out now as a fresh photographer. I think the approach that I did was I didn't go to any workshops until there was like the sweet one, and then it was the first Heck Yeah photo camp that I went to because the lineup was perfect. And then I said I'm never going to go to another one unless Sean Flanagan and Dylan Howell do one, and lo and behold, they do one like a year later. And then I said, cool, I'm done. I'm good. I've learned all I need to. But if I were to go back now, I really enjoy these kind of container approaches. And I know like Robert J. Hill does this, and there's another couple of photographers where they say, hey, you're gonna be like a one-on-one relationship with me for 3 months, 6 months, a year.
Yeah.
We're not gonna force some feign bonding by saying like, hey, we're all gonna go on a road trip for 7 days in Iceland. Yeah, you'll definitely make bonded relationships from that. But I don't know that the educator-educatee thing will be maintained after. Whereas these containers, I feel like if I were to start out and I said, oh my gosh, Miles has this incredible business that I'm seeking after, a very similar thing. He's speaking to honoring clients. It's what speaks to me, blah, blah, blah. I'd go, well, yeah, I want to have this relationship where I get to talk to you once a week. And rather than that like 2-hour brain dump that my friends get from me at a coffee shop, I get, an hour of insight, and like not dissimilar to a business coach, but a business coach that gives a shit. And
there it is.
I think that those, exactly. You're not in it for the money. You're actually like you're stoked to see my success as a new photographer. And it combines that pay it forward approach with pay you some money approach. And you get a little bit of both. And that would be the thing that I would be seeking out right now. And I think a few photographers are doing that. And I hope that the industry kind of shifts that way where I don't want to just go spend $1,900 to listen to some Southwest photographer talk at me for 4 hours with 25 people in the room. I think that you can walk away with really tangible stuff from that if you pick the right person, but you might also just get to hang out with someone that you like, and that's not the same as like a contain. Yeah, like I really love India Earl's work. If I'm a new photographer, I just want to be in the room with her and learn from her for sure. But it's not the same as like, can I have a mentor for 6 months?
Yeah. They're brilliant, to be honest. So that way it's like, if you're going to do a waterfall workshop, like I have a lot of friends that I've said a lot, but one of my very favorite destination photographers in the world is Tyler Rye. And he's on an expedition to Iceland right now.
Yeah.
And he's a good buddy of mine. He's just a great dude. And
he's a cool dude.
And
he's been on the pod.
I tell people that I'm like, if you want a waterfall workshop, just go do that and expect nothing else out of it. Like go just because it's going to be awesome. And he's going to make this whole thing like epic. But like the cool thing about that, especially in those situations, it's going to be so windy and so cold. You're not going to absorb anything that he's saying. Just shoot, just enjoy it, create art. And then
you're going to meet friends. You're going to make friends for sure. Like the other people that are there. That's not an
investment in your company. Yeah. That's not that's not an investment in your future. It's just an investment in your creativity. Yeah. That can be really special. Like maybe you need that, but yeah, finding a mentor, I think, is a huge step in the right direction.
Miles, dude, thank you so much for your time today. This was so insightful, so wonderful. I think that anybody that gets the opportunity to listen to you talk is going to take away just incredibly beneficial information, not only for their business, but also for their own perspective shift on like, why are we doing what we're doing? And I just really appreciate your time again.
Dude, thank you, Kyle. That means a whole lot, buddy. I mean, working alongside Narrative and seeing Bex and you and James and Sam, like the whole team win. Man, anything that I can do to align myself with people like y'all with positive voices like yours, then I'm all in. So anytime that door is open, I will run through it.